My name is Jolie Vesper. I am 33 years old, and the cruelest thing my mother ever did to me was not the way she compared me to my younger sister in rooms full of smiling relatives. It was not the way she could reduce a whole year of my work to one thin sentence and make me feel childish for wanting more. It was not even the years she spent teaching me to speak about myself as if I were a smaller person than I really was. The cruelest thing my mother ever did to me was make me believe that the biggest disappointment of my life had been mine. 3 months ago at my sister's engagement party, I found out it wasn't. And the reason I know exactly where my life split in two is because I can still remember what was in my hand when I heard the truth. A champagne flute, warm from sitting too long, a fingerprint near the rim. I remember staring at that fingerprint after the words landed, because my brain needed something small and stupid and ordinary to fix itself on, while the rest of me tried to understand what I had just heard. The party was being held at a rented stone estate on the main line outside Philadelphia, one of those old houses with too many windows, polished banisters, white hydrangeas in giant vases, and a front lawn that looked like it had never once known weeds. My mother loved places like that. She liked rooms that made everybody stand up straighter. She liked settings that made ordinary people feel grateful just to have been invited. She said elegance was about standards. What she really meant was control. There were lanterns hanging from the trees out back, trays of crab cakes floating past on silver platters, and a string quartet on the terrace playing songs no one was really listening to. My younger sister, Lila, stood in the center of everything in a pale blue dress, with one hand lifted every few minutes so another cluster of women could admire the ring. Her fiancé, Graham Holloway, looked exactly like the kind of man a family like mine approved of. Clean-cut, polite, good watch, good job. The face of someone who had never had to survive a room by reading it faster than everyone else. I had smiled for photos. I had complimented the flowers. I had laughed when expected. I had done what I had been doing for most of my life in my family, occupying space without ever taking up too much of it. Around 9:30, I realized I had left my phone upstairs in the powder room near the coat room. I remember because I checked for it twice in my purse, then once in the pocket of my coat, even though I knew I had not brought my coat inside. I remember because on my way up the back staircase, I passed my mother arranging napkins at the drinks table that did not need arranging. She was wearing ivory silk and pearls, and even from a distance I could feel that familiar pressure in my chest that came whenever she was near. The feeling that I needed to make myself emotionally smaller before she noticed me. The upstairs hallway was quiet compared to the rest of the house. Dim lamps, carpet muffling footsteps, the soft rise and fall of voices from downstairs. I found my phone on the edge of the marble sink where I had left it, and on my way back toward the stairs, I heard my Aunt Maren's voice from the small sitting room at the end of the hall. I should tell you about Maren. She was not really my aunt. She was my mother's cousin. But in families like ours, there are women who become aunts simply because they stay. Maren had lived within 20 minutes of us my whole life. She taught high school English for years, wore scarves even when the weather did not call for them, and had the kind of dry humor that only got drier when she drank. Lately, she had been drinking more than she used to. At the time, I thought it was one of those quiet middle-aged problems families politely ignored. Now I think maybe guilt had been rotting her from the inside for longer than any of us knew. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard her say, "I still don't know how you live with it." I slowed without meaning to. My mother answered first, calm and irritated in equal parts. "Maren, not tonight." "No," Maren said. "Especially tonight." There was a pause. I could hear ice shift in a glass. Then my mother said, very softly, very clearly, she was never rejected. She was just never meant to go. If there is a sound a body makes when a 15-year lie breaks open inside it, I do not know what it is. I know only that I did not hear the quartet anymore. I did not hear the party below. I did not hear my own breath. I felt the stem of the champagne flute pressing into my fingers, and I stared at the wall across from me because something in me already knew those words had attached themselves to the oldest wound I had. Maren spoke again, quieter now. "You took that choice away from her." My mother let out a slow breath, almost bored. I did what I had to do. I stepped into the doorway before I consciously decided to. All three women turned. Maren looked sick the moment she saw me. The other woman in the room, my mother's friend Evelyn, went pale and looked away, as if she wanted no part in witnessing the destruction of another family's myth. My mother looked directly at me. No flinch, no panic, no guilt, just that familiar, unreadable steadiness she always had when she believed reality itself could still be managed if she held her face correctly. I stood there with my phone in one hand and the champagne in the other and said, "What does that mean?" No one answered immediately. Then my mother, still sitting with one ankle crossed over the other, lifted her glass and took a slow sip as if we were discussing weather and not the corpse of my youth. "Not here," she said. That was when I knew it was true. Not because of what she said, because of what she didn't. If she had laughed, if she had denied it, if she had looked confused, some pathetic, hopeful part of me might have run toward those things and clung to them. But she didn't. She gave me logistics. Not here. As if the issue was setting, not substance. As if the truth itself had already been accepted by everyone in the room but me. I put the champagne glass down on the hallway table so hard it tipped and spilled across a stack of ivory place cards. Then I turned, walked into the nearest bathroom, and locked the door. I did not cry right away. That is one of the strangest parts of pain at my age. When you are young, grief comes out of you like weather. Immediate. Visible. Embarrassing. At 33, real shock turns first into stillness. I sat on the closed toilet lid in that immaculate bathroom with imported wallpaper and hand towels too decorative to touch, and I stared at my own reflection in the mirror over the sink. I saw a woman in a navy dress with gold earrings and mascara that had survived the heat. A woman who had managed commercial interiors budgets larger than the price of the first house my parents ever bought. A woman with a mortgage, a respectable title, and a pantry full of practical groceries. A woman who had spent 15 years quietly building a good life. And beneath all of that, like a younger face trapped behind glass, I saw the girl who had waited by a mailbox every day in the spring of her senior year for a letter that never came. That girl had never really left. She had only learned how to behave. I grew up in southeastern Pennsylvania in a suburb where everyone knew what schools everybody else's kids were applying to, where mailboxes stood at the end of long driveways like announcements, where neighbors asked polite questions that were really just status checks wrapped in smiles. My mother loved that environment because it let her narrate our family in public with very little interference. There was Lila, 3 years younger than me, bright, easy, charming, the kind of pretty that made adults smile at her in line at the grocery store. And then there was me. Taller, quieter, not shy exactly but careful. Lila had sparkle. I had discipline. That was how people would have described us if asked. My mother's version was simpler. Lila was special. I was stable. Stable was her favorite word for me. She said it at Thanksgiving when relatives asked how school was going. She said it at church socials when someone commented that I seemed mature. She said it at the grocery store when an old neighbor asked whether I planned to go away for college. "Jolie is very stable," she would say, smiling as if it were praise. "She's the kind of girl who doesn't need all that chaos." At 15, you don't yet understand how dangerous a label can be when it is repeated often enough by the person who teaches you what reality means. Stable sounded responsible, grounded, good. It took me years to understand that in my mother's mouth it meant limited. Local, easy to keep near. Lila got piano lessons. Lila got prep classes. Lila got a private college consultant who came to the house in camel coats and set her leather bag down on our dining room table like a doctor arriving for a valuable patient. I got brochures, not as advice, as a conclusion. The first time I found them, spread neatly across the kitchen table, they were all for local schools within driving distance. Community colleges, regional campuses, affordable, sensible. Their tuition costs had been circled in red pen. "What's this?" I asked. My mother did not look up from slicing strawberries. "Options," she said. I picked one up. "I didn't ask for these." She set down the knife. "Jolie, sweetheart, not every path has to be dramatic." That was her other trick. If I wanted more than what she had approved, she reframed desire itself as excess. Wanting was theatrical. Dreaming was vanity. Reaching was emotional immaturity. I was 17 the first time I heard someone say Barnard to me in a way that felt possible. It was Mrs. Eileen Crow, my English teacher. She was in her late 50s then, wore reading glasses on a chain, and had the kind of voice that made every sentence sound more meaningful than maybe it was. She taught American literature and somehow made even the boys in my class sit up when she spoke. One afternoon after school, I stayed back to ask about an essay, and she looked at my draft for a few minutes, then at me and said, "Where are you applying?" I gave her the list I was supposed to give people. The safe schools, the local options, the things my mother liked. Mrs. Crow frowned. "That is not what I asked," she said. "Where do you want to apply?" No one had asked me that before, not that way. I laughed a little because I thought the honest answer would sound ridiculous out loud. But she waited, so I said it. Quietly, like a confession. "Barnard." She did not laugh. She nodded once, as though I had just told her my shoe size. "Then apply." I remember standing there in her classroom with afternoon light on the desks and the smell of dry erase marker in the air, feeling something dangerous and bright open inside me. Permission. Not from my mother. Not from my circumstances. Just from another adult woman who had looked at me and seen a mind instead of a role. I applied in secret. I wrote my essay at the public library because I knew if I worked on it at home, my mother would ask questions I was not ready to answer. I sat in the same corner Carol 3 evenings in a row with a water bottle, a granola bar, and my notes spread around me, while outside the sun went down over the municipal parking lot. I wrote about buildings. About how spaces teach people what they are allowed to become. About the first time I understood that a room could make you feel invited or dismissed before anyone even spoke. I paid the application fee with cash I had saved from my part-time job at a bookstore cafe. 1s and 5s and 10s. Tip money, birthday money. Money I had hidden in a shoebox at the back of my closet under old jeans. Mrs. Crow wrote my recommendation letter and gave it to me sealed. When I thanked her, she held onto the envelope for one extra second before letting it go. "Go where your mind has room," she said. "Do not let someone else's fear become your ceiling." I mailed the application from the post office downtown instead of using our home mailbox because I already knew, even then, that too much hope placed openly on our kitchen counter became an invitation for my mother to discuss it to death. Then I waited. Every day after school I got off the bus, walked past the hedge, down the slight slope of our driveway, and checked the mailbox before I went inside. The mailbox was green metal, dented on one side, slightly crooked on its post. My mother usually got home from the county office at around 3:15. I got off the bus at 3:40. 25 minutes. That was the gap. I did not know then that 25 minutes was enough time to alter a life. Most days the mailbox held catalogs, political flyers, bills, and things addressed to my mother in that stiff black print she loved. Some days, it held nothing. I waited for the thick envelope everyone said you could recognize the second you saw it. It never came. Not to me. Weeks passed. I stopped talking about college in front of other people because every conversation made me feel like a fraud. Lila would chatter about some summer arts program she wanted. My mother would nod approvingly. Someone would turn to me and ask where I planned to go. And before I could answer, my mother would say, "Jolie's looking at practical options, something that makes sense." Practical. That word started to feel like dirt in my mouth. One evening I asked her directly. We were in the kitchen. She was going through grocery circulars with a red pen, circling sale prices the way some women annotate novels. "Did anything come for me from Barnard?" She did not hesitate. "No," she said. "Nothing came." She looked up then, gave me a small sad smile and added, "Maybe that's your answer. Maybe that's your answer." I went upstairs, closed my bedroom door, and cried into my pillow with both fists pressed against my mouth so she would not hear me, and come in pretending to comfort me, while secretly feeling correct. The next morning there were 3 local college orientation packets on the kitchen table, beside my cereal bowl. Already opened. Already selected. One had the registration deadline marked in red. That was the morning I stopped asking. And that, more than anything, is the part that haunted me later. Not only that she lied. that I accepted the lie so completely. I did not call. I did not push. I did not fight hard enough. I was 18, and the person who had shaped the walls of my mind told me I had hit one. I believed her because it hurt less than believing she had moved it. I enrolled locally, transferred later, built a life. If you compress 15 years into a paragraph, it sounds almost admirable. Community college, transfer to a state program, internship, entry-level job, promotion, better title, better paycheck, house at 31, senior project planner at 32. The kind of story people call resilient because it lets them feel inspired without getting too close to the damage underneath. But real life did not feel compressed while I was inside it. It felt like a staircase that kept turning and turning in a building with no window. I worked at a small design build firm first, the kind that did restaurant renovations and boutique office spaces for clients who wanted exposed brick and industrial warmth. I learned how to read plans, talk to contractors, calm down furious clients, and fix disasters before they became invoices. I learned fire code, finish schedules, material lead times, and the exact voice to use when a man old enough to be my father tried to explain my own project back to me in a meeting. I was good at it. Not because anyone in my family told me I was talented, because the work rewarded the very qualities my mother had used to shrink me. Precision, endurance, practical intelligence, the ability to see systems. At 26, I became a project coordinator. At 29, I was running smaller projects myself. At 32, I was overseeing major commercial redesigns for law offices, medical suites, and luxury condo common areas, with budgets that would have made the entire town I grew up in nod with respect. I bought a narrow brick townhouse in South Philadelphia with creaky stairs, an exposed beam in the kitchen, and a little postage stamp patio out back where I kept rosemary in a pot and 2 folding chairs I almost never used. The first night I slept there, the place still smelled faintly of fresh paint and cardboard. I lay on a mattress on the floor because my bed frame had not arrived yet, looked up at the ceiling fan turning slowly above me, and thought, I'd built a life. And still, every time I reached a milestone, my mother found a way to narrate it as if it were a decent but lesser substitute for something bigger that belonged to someone else. You always were good at managing details, she said when I got promoted. That neighborhood is coming up, she said when I bought the house. It's nice that you found your lane, she said once over Christmas dinner, while Lila talked about a marketing conference in Chicago. Found your lane. As if I were a car she had worried might drift. Lila, meanwhile, lived in the glossy center of my mother's pride. She was good at many things, smart, charming, creative. She had worked hard too. I need to say that, because family stories become too simple too easily, and Lila was never the villain in mine. She was my sister. She was also my mother's favorite project. What I resented was not that Lila succeeded, it was that every one of her successes was used to keep me in emotional proportion. The comparison was never loud enough to accuse, just constant enough to shape, like water on stone. Then, 6 months before her engagement party, something shifted in me. It happened on a Tuesday during lunch. I was sitting in my car outside a client site in Center City, eating pad thai out of a cardboard takeout box balanced on my lap, when I read an article about adults returning to highly selective schools through non-traditional admissions tracks. I nearly missed the end of lunch because I read it 3 times. Then I searched more. Then I opened a program page. Then another. I sat there staring at the screen while the steering wheel dug into my ribs and traffic slid past on Market Street, and a truth I had kept sedated for 15 years lifted its head and looked at me. I still wanted it. Not the specific fantasy version of being 18 and rescued by prestige. Something older, sharper, harder to dismiss. I wanted the life of my mind back. That night, I opened my laptop at my kitchen table after dinner. The dishwasher hummed. The overhead light was too yellow. I had half a glass of wine I forgot to drink. And I started an application. Not because I thought I would definitely get in. Because I could no longer live inside my mother's version of who I was without at least testing whether it was true. I did not tell her. I did not tell Lila. I did not tell anyone at first. A few weeks in, I emailed Mrs. Crow, now retired, on a wild impulse after finding her school contact through an alumni newsletter. I half expected no reply. Instead, I got one within an hour. Jolie, I wondered if you might come back to this one day. Tell me what you need. I stared at that line until my vision blurred. A month later, after essays and recommendations and transcripts and an interview I nearly talked myself out of attending, the acceptance letter arrived. I was parked outside a Wawa on City Avenue because I had been too nervous to open it at home. I sat in my car with the engine off, rain tapping lightly on the windshield, fluorescent gas station light making everything outside look unreal. When I saw the first line, I made a sound that did not even feel human. I folded over the steering wheel and cried the kind of cry that empties a person out from somewhere very old. The letter was not from Barnard. Life is rarely that symmetrical. It was from a highly respected adult degree program in New York, close enough in spirit that something in me felt seen across time. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my bag. From that day on, I carried it with me almost everywhere. Not because I meant to show anyone, because I was still afraid, in some stupid, primitive part of myself, that if I set it down too long someone might take this chance too. I had planned to tell my family later, maybe after the engagement party, maybe after Lila's wedding, maybe when it felt safe. I did not know yet that safe was never coming. So when I sat in that upstairs bathroom after overhearing my mother say I was never rejected, only never meant to go, my acceptance letter was already in my purse, folded, warm from being near me, waiting. I stayed in that bathroom for maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. Time in those moments stops obeying clocks. Eventually I stood, fixed my lipstick with hands that no longer felt attached to me, and went back downstairs. The party had thickened into evening by then. More laughter, more noise, more people speaking slightly too loudly over each other, because the bar had been open long enough. Through the dining room windows I could see lantern light in the garden and the white blur of folded napkins on tables out back. Everything looked expensive and staged and calm. I remember thinking with almost unbearable bitterness that my family had always preferred a beautiful setting for ugly things. My mother stood at the edge of the living room talking to one of Graham's aunts. Her posture was perfect. One hand lightly touching Lila's elbow, her face arranged into maternal satisfaction. She glanced at me exactly once. Nothing. No look of fear. No attempt to explain. Just the smallest tightening near her mouth, as if she were annoyed that the timing of an unavoidable conversation had become inconvenient. I should have confronted her right then in front of everyone. That is what people like to imagine they would do. Heroic, immediate, dramatic. But the truth is, when the person who has held emotional power over you your whole life is suddenly standing 10 feet away with the full weight of your reality in her hands, your first instinct is not performance. It is survival. I needed facts. I needed to hear the whole thing from someone who was not my mother. So I found Maren. She was on the side terrace, hidden partially by a stone column, smoking half a cigarette with the desperate concentration of a person who had promised someone she quit. The wind kept pulling the smoke back into her face. I walked right up to her and said, "Tell me everything." Her whole expression collapsed. "Oh, honey, no." My voice was flat, even to my own ears. "Do not start with that. Tell me everything." People think devastating truths arrive as one clean blow. They don't. They come in pieces. And the worst part is that your body keeps making room for each new piece, even after you are sure there is no room left. Maren stubbed out the cigarette in a flower pot and leaned against the stone railing. "Your letter came," she said. "Your mother got the mail first. She took it." I swallowed and said nothing. "There was more after that," she continued. "Follow-up mail, financial aid information, housing. Eileen Crow called the house because she knew you had applied and wondered why you hadn't responded to something. I don't remember what exactly. Your mother told her you had decided not to go." I closed my eyes for 1 second. Mrs. Crow had called. Somewhere inside me, a younger version of myself turned and looked back. "She told people," Maren said, and her voice shook now, "that you'd changed your mind because you knew you couldn't handle it. She said you were embarrassed and didn't want anyone discussing it." I opened my eyes. "And you knew?" "I knew enough." "Enough to do what?" The question came out harsher than I meant it to, but I did not take it back. Maren's eyes filled. Enough to stop this 15 years ago, I know. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time I saw not just the woman who had occasionally brought wine to Christmas and made sarcastic comments under her breath, but someone who had been carrying rot. Someone who had let a lie live because opposing my mother seemed harder than sacrificing me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. She laughed once, but it sounded more like choking. "Because your mother knew exactly how to hold a family hostage without ever using the word. She said if I interfered she'd tell everyone I was unstable. That I was drinking again. That I was making things up because I hated her. And because back then, Jolie, everybody adjusted themselves around Elaine. She was the weather. We all learned to move our furniture instead of confronting the storm." I wanted to hate her. For a few seconds, I almost did, but there was already too much grief in me to waste all of it cleanly. So I asked, "Why did she do it?" Maren stared through the glass doors into the living room where my mother was laughing now at something one of Graham's relatives had said. "She thought if you left, you wouldn't come back," she said. Then she hesitated. I waited. "And," she added, "because I don't think she could bear to watch you walk toward something she once wanted and never got." That sentence did something strange inside me. It did not soften her. It made her uglier. Because envy from strangers hurts one way. Envy from your mother is a wound with roots. I stood there in the cold air of the terrace with my acceptance letter heavy in my purse, while the whole shape of my life rearranged itself around one revelation after another. I had not failed. I had been managed. I had not been denied by the world. I had been denied by the woman who taught me what I was allowed to expect from it. I could feel my pulse behind my eyes. Then I reached into my purse and touched the folded edge of my new acceptance letter. Maren saw the movement. "What is that?" I looked at her. "My second chance," I said. When we went back inside, the room felt different. Not because anyone else knew yet. Because I did. That is a strange power. The instant after the truth enters you, but before the rest of the world catches up. You become temporarily two people at once, the one everyone thinks they are still dealing with, and the one who now sees the whole structure. My mother was still behaving as if the night belonged to her. Lila had moved toward the piano with Graham and two friends. Someone was opening another bottle of champagne. One of Graham's aunts stopped me near the drinks table and asked what I did these days because she had heard from Elaine that I worked in interiors. Before I could answer, my mother appeared at my shoulder like she had been summoned by the possibility that I might define myself. "Jolie manages operational things," she said with a smile. "She's always had a gift for supporting structures." Supporting structures. I looked at her. There it was again. The language of my own reduction, so polished by repetition it almost passed for praise. Something in me went still. I set down my glass. "I oversee major commercial design projects," I said, "and I'm starting a degree program in New York this fall." My mother turned her head slowly, not dramatically, but I saw the flicker. She had not known. That mattered. "Oh," she said, "well, that's ambitious." Ambitious? In her mouth, the word meant reckless, inflated, beyond one's station. A few people nearby had gone quiet now. Just enough of a lull to make the air feel thinner. I reached into my purse. I took out the folded acceptance letter and set it on the table between the candle holders. Then I took out a printed email I had requested from the admissions office 2 days earlier after a strange instinct, sharpened by a few guilty silences from Maren over the past week, had pushed me to verify my old records. They could not release everything, but they had confirmed in writing that an offer of admission had been extended to me in my senior year and that I had failed to respond to further communications. I laid that paper next to the new letter. Then I looked at my mother and said, "I got in when I was 18. The room did not stop all at once. It thinned. Sound draining out in layers, a laugh cut short, ice settling in a glass. The quartet outside finishing a phrase no one inside seemed to hear anymore. My mother's face changed by degrees. Not surprise. Calculation. Lila turned from across the room. "What?" I kept my eyes on my mother. "I got in," I said again. "I just never knew it." My mother inhaled once through her nose. "Jolie, this is neither the time nor the place." "No," I said. "The time was 15 years ago when you took my letter out of the mailbox. That did it." Silence hit the room. Not polite silence, shock silence, the kind where bodies go still because language has not arrived yet. Lila was beside us now. Graham closed behind her. Maren standing near the terrace doors with both hands gripping the back of a chair. Evelyn staring at the floor. Graham's mother holding a canapé in midair, no longer pretending not to listen. Lila looked from me to the papers to our mother. What is she talking about? My mother tried to straighten deeper into herself. Your sister is upset. I laughed once. It came out sharp enough to make even me flinch. Did you take it? I asked. She did not answer immediately. And in that hesitation, everyone knew. Still, I needed the words. Did you take my acceptance letter? My mother's voice, when it came, was quiet, almost weary, as if I were forcing her to explain a reasonable decision to emotional people. You would not have lasted there. There are moments when pain becomes so clean it stops feeling like pain and becomes clarity. That was mine. Not because the words were cruel, because they were not defensive. She was not denying it, she was justifying it, even now. Even in front of my sister and her fiancé and a room full of witnesses. She was not ashamed, she believed she had been right. Lila stepped backward like the floor had moved. Mom, she said. I will never forget that one word in her voice. Not confusion, not hurt, disgust beginning. You told me, Lila said slowly, that she never applied anywhere serious. My mother turned toward her. Lila, this is private. No, I said. It stopped being private when you built 15 years of my life around a lie. I picked up the old confirmation email and held it so she could see it. There was an offer, there were follow-ups, there was financial aid information. Mrs. Crow called the house. At that, my mother's jaw tightened, a reaction. Tiny. Real. Lila put a hand over her mouth. She called the house? She whispered. I nodded. And then I saw something happen in my sister's face. Memory. The kind that does not arrive as words first, but as sensation. Recognition surfacing from somewhere old and half-dismissed. Her eyes widened just slightly. When I was 15, she said, still looking at her mother, I walked into the garage one night and you were burning papers in that metal sink. No one moved. You said it was junk mail. My mother said nothing. Lila's voice got smaller. Was that hers? The question just hung there, awful in its smallness. Not a cinematic reveal, something worse, domestic, plausible. The kind of quiet act that ruins a life while dishes dry in the rack and no one upstairs has any idea what is disappearing below them. My mother looked at me then, not Lila. I did what I thought was necessary, she said. Necessary. There are words that should never be used about a child's future. Necessary is one of them. Behind us, a chair scraped softly. My grandmother Celeste, 84 years old and generally underestimated by everyone except maybe God, was standing at the edge of the room with one hand on her cane. No, Elaine, she said. You did what was easiest for you. My mother turned. Mother, please. But Grandma kept going. You did not protect anybody. You punished that girl because she wanted what you never got. The room shifted again. This was the first time I understood that other people had suspected more than I knew. Maren gave one tiny broken nod, and there it was, another ugly piece fitting into place. My mother had once wanted to leave too. Maybe New York, maybe somewhere else, some school, some city, some larger version of herself that never happened. I still do not know the whole story. Only that she had once wanted out, and life had closed around her, in some combination of fear, circumstance, pride, and bitterness. And when she saw in me the same hunger to leave, she did not bless it, she smothered it. Because if she could not become that woman, maybe neither could I. The realization did not make me pity her. It made me see her more clearly than I ever had before. She had spent my whole life performing sacrifice when what she was really doing was revenge. My mother reached for her clutch and said, I am leaving. That was her move, always had been. Exit first. Become the wronged party before anyone else could define the scene. But this time no one rushed to stop her. No one softened. No one said, Elaine, wait. And in that stillness, I saw something almost human cross her face. Not remorse. Astonishment. As if she had truly believed the room would always follow her. I looked at her and felt, to my own surprise, not rage. Not in that moment. Just a kind of cold, irreversible understanding. So I said the truest thing I have ever said in my life. You did not destroy me. She stopped. The room held its breath. You delayed me, I said. 15 years. That is what you took. 15 years, but I am still going. I held up my new acceptance letter. Without your blessing, without your belief, and now, without your permission. My mother's face did not collapse dramatically, she was too disciplined for that. But something went out of it. Something that had always assumed it could write the final sentence. Then she walked out, and no one followed her. That, more than anything, changed the axis of my life. Not the confession, not the papers, not even Lila crying quietly with one hand over her mouth, while Graham stood beside her, looking at my mother's empty space like he had just met a stranger he had nearly called family. It was the fact that the emotional gravity of the room did not leave when she did. All my life, my mother had trained us to believe she was the center that held the family together, that without her version of events, everything would collapse into ugliness and disorder. But the room did not collapse. The truth hurt. It burned. It split people open, but the room held. And for the first time in my life I understood that control and cohesion are not the same thing. Lila came to me first. Not with a speech, not with polished words, just with tears. I didn't know, she kept saying. Jolie, I swear to God I didn't know. And I believed her. That is one of the hardest truths to explain to people who like villains simple. Lila had been favored. Yes, elevated, displayed, compared against me in ways that wounded us both, but she had also been used. Our mother had turned her into evidence. The golden child is still a child, just one positioned closer to the fire. I hugged her because she was my sister, and because I could feel her whole understanding of our family rearranging in real time. Graham said very little, which made me like him more. The only thing he said that night, quietly, while Lila wiped her face and tried to breathe was, "I'm sorry this happened tonight. I'm sorry you had to go through it here." It was not his fault, I almost said. Not his house. Her stage. But I knew what he meant. The rest of the party dissolved around us. People left early under thin excuses. Someone turned off the quartet. Trays of untouched desserts sat on sideboards while relatives pretended to discuss rides and coats and the late hour instead of the fact that a family had just been exposed in front of them. Maren apologized that night before leaving. Not cleanly. Not in some graceful movie speech. In the front hall, while searching too long in her bag for her car keys, she looked at me with eyes swollen from crying and said, "I should have chosen you over peace." I did not answer right away. Then I said, "Yes, you should have." She nodded, as if that sentence had been waiting for her for 15 years. I did not forgive her then. I am not even sure forgiveness is always the right word for things like that. But I accepted the truth she offered, because it was at least truth. When I got home after midnight, I did something I had not done in years. I sat in my parked car outside my house long after I had turned the engine off. There is something about a car after a family event. The silence, the leftover perfume, the programs or gift bags on the passenger seat. The sense that whatever performance you have just survived no longer applies once the doors are closed. I sat there with my hands on the steering wheel and my purse in my lap and finally cried. Not delicate crying. Not a single cinematic tear. I cried until my whole face hurt. I cried for the 18-year-old who had asked one question in the kitchen and accepted the answer because she thought mothers did not lie that way. I cried for every meeting where I had second-guessed myself because some old interior voice whispered, "Maybe you're not really meant for rooms like this." I cried for the years I had treated my own life as the practical version of someone else's, more deserving future. And underneath all of that grief, there was another feeling. Relief. Wild, savage relief. Because the oldest shame of my life was not mine. It had never been mine. For 15 years I had carried the emotional shape of a rejection that did not happen. I had built my identity around a wound someone else manufactured. And now that lie was dead. The fallout over the next week did not explode so much as spread. Family members called in waves. Not because I announced anything. I did not have to. Families like mine run on hidden currents until someone finally names the thing everyone has been circling. Then the whole system starts rattling. My grandmother Celeste called me at 9 the next morning and asked if I had eaten breakfast. When I said yes, she said, "Good. Now listen to me. Nothing that woman did says anything about your worth. It says everything about her fear." It was maybe the most direct thing she had ever said to me. Maren called later that afternoon, sober. Entirely sober. She told me she had poured every bottle in her house down the sink that morning. I did not know whether to believe that yet, but her voice sounded like scraped skin. Mrs. Crow, when I emailed her the truth, replied within an hour, "I always knew that spring ended wrong." Then she wrote something else that made me cry all over again. "You were never small. Someone just benefited from teaching you to live that way." Lila called 3 days later. We talked for almost 3 hours. Longer than we had ever talked in our adult lives, without our mother somehow entering the conversation and rearranging it by force of personality, or guilt, or interruption. We sat in separate apartments with separate lives, and, for the first time, told each other the truth without Jolie Vesper in the room, translating everything into winners and losers. Lila told me our mother had always described me to her as someone who wanted a simple life, that I had not wanted pressure, that I thrived with structure and didn't need all that competition. She said every comparison she had ever heard between us had been framed as praise for her at the time, never as theft from me. She said she understood now that our mother had used her achievements as proof of her own motherhood and mine as containment. "I thought being loved by her meant I was doing things right," Lila said quietly. I leaned back on my couch and stared at the ceiling fan. "No," I said, "it meant you were useful to the story." There was a long silence, then she said, "I think I was her trophy." The sentence sat between us. I did not rush to soothe it, because it was true, and truth, I was learning, does not always need immediate comfort. Sometimes it needs room. The strongest relationships in my life after that were not the ones with the most history. They were the ones with the most honesty. My mother wrote me a letter about a month later, handwritten, 2 pages. Not an apology, an explanation, which is what people like her offer when they cannot bear guilt, but still want access to the moral language of it. She wrote about sacrifice, about being a single mother, about financial pressure, about having to make hard choices when I was too young to understand what life really cost. She wrote that I had always been sensitive to disappointment, and that she had feared New York would eat me alive. She wrote that all she had ever wanted was to keep the family together. She did not say I'm sorry. She did not say I was wrong. At the bottom, in a postscript written smaller than the rest, she added one line that was closer to the truth than anything above it. "I knew if you left, you would never need me again." I stared at that sentence for a very long time. Then I folded the letter and put it in a kitchen drawer under old utility bills and takeout menus. That was the moment I understood something final about my mother. Her love had always been tangled up with dependency. She did not want me thriving freely. She wanted me orbiting. And once you see that, you cannot go back to calling it concern. In August, I moved into a small apartment in New York for the program. Not glamorous, not some fantasy loft. A 4th-floor walk-up with radiators that hissed like judgment, and a kitchen so narrow I had to step aside to open the fridge properly. But when I set my keys on that tiny counter the first night and looked around at the unpacked boxes and the single window facing a brick wall, I felt something I had not felt in years. Alignment. I was where my mind had wanted to go before someone decided wanting that was dangerous. Orientation was full of people like me and unlike me all at once. Veterans, parents, career changers. A woman in her 40s who had worked in dental hygiene for 20 years before deciding she wanted to study public policy. A man who had spent a decade in restaurants and now wanted to teach history. People with scar tissue. People who did not treat a seat in a classroom like something decorative. At the welcome session, an advisor stood at the front of the room and said, "You belong here. That is why we admitted you." 7 words. They entered me like medicine. I thought of the old mailbox, the dented green metal, the red-circled tuition in those brochures on our kitchen table, the years I had apologized for wanting more, the old voice that still sometimes rose in me before meetings, before presentations, before new rooms, asking whether I was sure I deserved to be there. "You belong here. That is why we admitted you." I wish I could tell you that one sentence erased 15 years of damage. It didn't. Healing is less dramatic than that. It looked more like this. Raising my hand in class the first week, and feeling my pulse kick in my throat before I spoke, then speaking anyway. turning in papers without rereading every line 17 times, because some old terror was still telling me that mistakes would expose me as an imposter. Walking through campus and not flinching every time I saw a 19-year-old who seemed to move through the place with birthright ease. It looked like studying on the subway, with my work laptop in one bag and academic books in another. It looked like eating cheap dumplings at 11 at night over annotated readings. It looked like wondering sometimes whether I had been brave or insane, and realizing those two things overlap more often than people admit. At the end of my first semester, I made Dean's List. I checked my grades on my laptop at my tiny chin table with a mug of tea going cold beside me and snow beginning to collect on the fire escape outside. I read the screen 3 times because some old part of me still expects systems to reverse themselves at the last second. Then I laughed. Actually laughed. Alone in my apartment. Because it was so absurdly perfect. She had said I would not last. I had made Dean's List. I sent the screenshot to Lila. She replied in less than a minute. "I'm so proud of you." All caps. 3 exclamation points. Then a string of emojis I would once have made fun of and that now somehow made me cry. Mrs. Crow mailed me a fountain pen in a velvet box with a note that read, "For the woman who finally went where her mind belonged." Maren sent flowers with a card that read, "15 years late, but right on time." My mother sent nothing. And this is the part I want to say carefully because I know what audiences like. They like a neat moral. They like the part where the mother finally understands, where the apology arrives, where the daughter is vindicated in language as clear as the wound. That did not happen for me. My mother did not transform. She did not appear outside my apartment in some expensive coat, clutching repentance. She did not send a Christmas card that said I was wrong and you were always enough. She stayed mostly silent. And at first, that silence felt like one more abandonment. Then slowly, it began to feel like freedom. Because for the first time in my life, my worth was not being negotiated in relation to her recognition of it. It simply was. That sounds simple when you say it fast. It is not simple when you have spent your entire life trying to earn visibility from someone who only knows how to love what reflects well on them. Some days, I still grieved for what had been taken from me. Some days, I walked back from class along Broadway, with my backpack digging into my shoulders, and looked at all the windows lit up in the buildings around me, and felt a grief so specific it was almost architectural. Not just for the years, for the version of me that might have grown in different light. The 18-year-old who would have entered a room like this before she had learned to apologize for existing in one. The friendships, the confidence, the earlier start. Those losses are real. I do not romanticize them. But grief is not the same thing as defeat. My mother did not destroy me. That sentence remains the center of everything. She delayed me, distorted me, and made me carry a shame that was never mine through the first third of my life. But she did not destroy me. And if someone in your life has ever done something similar, not necessarily by throwing away a letter, though maybe it was that concrete, maybe it was words, maybe it was years of being told you were too much or not enough or not the sort of person who got to enter bigger rooms, I need you to hear the part that took me 33 years to understand. The person who decides your ceiling without your consent is not an authority. They are an obstacle. That is different. You do not need their apology to continue. You do not need their permission to reopen the door. You do not need them to finally confess in front of the right witnesses and say, "Yes, I was afraid of your future, so I tried to keep it small enough for my comfort." You may get that. You may not. I got a version of the truth, but not remorse, and still I went. That is what matters most to me now. Not that she admitted it. Not that the family saw it. Not even that Lila and I, slowly, painfully, honestly, are rebuilding something more real than what we had before. What matters most is this. 15 years ago, my mother stood in front of a door and made me believe it had never opened. She was wrong. She was just standing there. And this time, I walked through without waiting for her to move. Here is something I have learned the hard way. Sometimes the people who were supposed to protect your sense of self are the very ones who teach you to doubt it. And when the truth finally comes, it does not always arrive with an apology. Sometimes it arrives quietly, leaving you to rebuild your life with your own hands, your own voice, and your own courage. But maybe that is what makes it real. Maybe healing begins the moment you stop waiting for the people who hurt you to explain your worth back to you. And if you have ever had to do that, if you have ever had to outgrow a version of yourself that someone else tried to keep small, I hope this story stays you tonight in the gentlest way. I hope it reminds you that it is not too late to walk through the door they told you was closed. I do want to ask you something, and I hope you'll answer honestly. If someone in your family called you tomorrow after years of distance, what do you think they would say first? Would it be, "Help me?" Or "I'm sorry"? And have you ever lived through a moment where you found out the story you had been told about your own life was never really the truth at all? If you feel comfortable, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and share your thoughts. I read the comments, and I know there are so many quiet stories out there that deserve to be heard. And if stories like this speak to you, stories about pain, hard choices, and the long road back to yourself, take a moment to subscribe and stay with us. There are more stories waiting here, and maybe one of them will feel a little like yours. Thank you for listening. I'm truly glad you were here. I'll see you in the next video.